You bitch. Get out of my life. That was the last thing I heard before his hand closed around my arm like a vice. The night air was thick, humid, buzzing with mosquitoes, and the headlights cut through the mist like knives. I stumbled as Max dragged me out of the car, my heels sinking into the soft, wet ground. Max, please, I gasped. We can talk. Talk? He spat, his breath hot with fury. I'm done talking, Luna. You've taken enough from me. His voice was low, dangerous, almost calm, the kind of calm that hides something fatal. The sound of crickets and frogs filled the silence between his words, a grotesque kind of applause for what was about to happen. We were in the middle of the Louisiana swamp, miles from the nearest house. The water shimmered black under the moonlight, still and endless. The smell of mud and decay filled my lungs. I'd thought he'd wanted to make peace tonight. He'd said he wanted to go for a drive. To talk about starting fresh. But there was nothing fresh about this place. Only death, and the man I no longer recognized. He turned toward me, eyes gleaming in the dark. You think you can leave me? Take half of what I built? He laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. You don't deserve a damn cent. Max, please. He moved faster than I could react. His hands hit my shoulders, hard. I fell backward, my foot slipping on the wet ground. The world tilted, sky, water, trees, and then cold swallowed me whole. Mud filled my mouth. I clawed upward, gasping for air. And then I felt his hands again, this time pressing down. This, he hissed, his face inches from mine, voice dripping with hatred, is exactly where you belong. Water rushed over my head. My lungs screamed. My mind fractured into flashes, his face, the stars, the darkness closing in. When I finally broke the surface, choking and trembling, the car lights were gone. So was he. The only sound left was the croaking of frogs and the echo of his words, circling in my head like a curse. I crawled onto the muddy bank, my body shaking, my skin raw from the reeds and gravel. My throat burned with every breath. The swamp stretched around me, endless, merciless. For a long time, I just lay there, staring at the black sky, the taste of dirt and betrayal thick on my tongue. He thought he'd buried me here. He thought this was where I belonged, but as I dragged myself toward the faint glimmer of the river's edge, I whispered to the darkness, no, Max. Not yet. People always say monsters hide in the dark. They don't. They hide behind warm smiles, steady hands, and the kind of laughter that makes. You forget what fear sounds like. That's how Max appeared the first time I met him. It was a late summer afternoon in Baton Rouge. I'd just finished work at the library and stopped by a small cafe on Main Street, the kind with mismatched chairs and jazz humming through old speakers. He was sitting 2 tables away, tapping his pen against a notebook, looking like someone who belonged in another life entirely. When I dropped my purse and my receipts scattered everywhere, he stood up without hesitation, helping me pick them up. His eyes were sharp, but kind. Careless day? He asked with that easy grin that would one day destroy me. I laughed. You could say that. We talked for hours, about books, travel, food. He listened like I was the only person in the world. I'd never met a man who asked questions just to hear my thoughts. When he walked me to my car, he said, "You have a beautiful way of seeing the world, Luna. I'd like to see it with you, if you'd let me." I should have known then, words like that are dangerous. But I was 28, lonely, and starved for gentleness. Within weeks, we were inseparable. He sent flowers to my work. He memorized my coffee order. He looked at me like I was something precious, like he couldn't believe I existed. 8 months later, we were married under a willow tree by the bayou. My dress was simple. My heart was full. He kissed my forehead and whispered, "You'll never have to worry again, my Luna. You have me now." And for a while, he meant it. Or at least, he acted like he did. The first cracks were so small I almost missed them. A comment about the skirt I wore. You don't need attention from other men. A question about my phone. Why do you text your coworkers so late? Then came the subtle isolation. I just want more time with you, baby. You don't need those friends. They don't understand us. At first, it sounded like love, possessive, passionate love. But love that cages you isn't love. It's control wearing perfume. Soon, he wanted access to my accounts. Just for emergencies, he said. I didn't argue, we were married. What was mine was his. Then he wanted my passwords. My schedule. My spending. By the first year, he knew everything, and I didn't know who I was anymore. The first time he hit me, I told myself it was my fault. It was a Tuesday night. He came home late, smelling like whiskey and cigarettes. I'd made gumbo, his favorite, but it had cooled by the time he sat down. He looked at the bowl, then at me. You don't even try anymore, do you? Max, the slap came out of nowhere. Sharp. Sudden. The sound of it echoed off the kitchen tiles. I remember the metallic taste of blood. The way the spoon trembled in my hand. The silence that followed. He stared at me, eyes wide. As if he couldn't believe what he'd done. Then he knelt. He cried. He held my face in his hands and whispered, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Luna. I didn't mean it. I've been under so much stress at work. Please forgive me." And I did. Because I loved him. Because I wanted to believe it was a mistake. The next morning, he brought home lilies, my favorite. He kissed me like he was trying to erase the bruise on my cheek. For a while, I let myself believe he could, but apologies became patterns. And patterns became prisons. He learned how to hide his cruelty behind charm. In public, he was the perfect husband, polite, witty, the man who opened doors for me. People envied us. Behind closed doors, he turned cold. Every argument was my fault. Every bruise had an explanation. He'd accuse me of cheating when I stayed late at work. He'd grab my wrist too tightly when I disagreed. He'd whisper things that burned worse than the bruises. "No one would believe you. You'd be nothing without me. You belong to me." Those words followed me everywhere, like ghosts. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night and watch him sleep, wondering how someone could look so peaceful after breaking another person. I tried to leave once. Just once. I packed a small bag and drove halfway to my mother's house before turning back. He called me 27 times that night. When I came home, he was waiting on the porch, flowers in one hand, tears in his eyes. "I thought I lost you," he said. "You can't just run away every time we fight. We're stronger than that, Luna." And I wanted to believe him. God help me, I did, because when you've been broken long enough, you start mistaking fear for loyalty. Years passed that way, good days and bad. Promises and punishments. He'd disappear for business trips that lasted weeks. He'd come home smelling like cologne that wasn't mine. Once, I asked him if there was someone else. He smiled. "You're imagining things again." I wanted to believe that, too. Until one night, I found a message on his phone. Just one line from an unknown number. "When will you tell her?" When I looked up, he was standing in the doorway, watching me. And for the first time, I saw it, the calculation behind his eyes, the quiet hatred beneath his smile. That night, he apologized again. He said he was just confused. That I was all he ever needed. He made me promise not to doubt him again. And I did, because I didn't know the price I'd pay for staying. Now, when I think back to those years, they feel like someone else's life, a movie I once watched through fogged glass. People ask why women stay with men like him. The truth? Because leaving feels more dangerous than staying. Because you think maybe, just maybe, this time he'll change. Because sometimes, hope is just another way to hurt yourself. The night he drove me to the swamp, I didn't see the monster. I saw the man I once loved, the one who'd picked up my receipts, made me laugh, called me his Luna, but that man had died long before that night. I just hadn't buried him yet. It was the calm before the storm, that kind of eerie peace that comes right before the world remembers how to hurt you again. For weeks, Max had been different, gentler, apologetic. He brought home dinner, left notes on the fridge. "I love you, Luna." He even stopped drinking for a while. I wanted to believe it was real. That maybe the man I'd fallen in love with had found his way back through the madness. Maybe the nightmare was over. Then, one night, he said softly, "Let's go for a drive. Just you and me. No phones, no fights. I want to talk, really talk." The way he smiled, the way his eyes softened, I didn't see danger. I saw hope. So, I said yes. The night air was thick with humidity, heavy enough to taste. We drove for miles, the headlights slicing through the endless dark Louisiana road. The radio was off. The only sound was the rhythmic hum of the tires on wet asphalt. I watched the trees blur past, the way the Spanish moss hung low like whispers. "Where are we going?" I asked after a while. "Somewhere quiet," he said, gripping the wheel tighter. "A place where no one interrupts us." There was something about the way he said "no one" that made my stomach twist. But I pushed the thought away. "Max, if this is about the argument last week," "It's not," he interrupted, his tone sharp, final. Then, softer, "It's about us, Luna. About how things used to be." I nodded, though a part of me felt the air getting colder despite the summer heat. We turned off the main road, down a narrow dirt path. The car jolted with every bump, the headlights flashing over waterlogged grass and tangled roots. "Max, this isn't the way to the cabin," I murmured. He didn't answer. I looked out the window. Swamp. Nothing but endless swamp. "Max?" Finally, he stopped the car. The engine idled for a moment before dying into silence. Outside, the night pulsed with the croaks of frogs and the distant buzz of insects. The smell of wet earth seeped through the open window. My heart began to hammer. "What are we doing here?" I asked quietly. He turned to me, his face half in shadow, half in moonlight. And for the first time, I saw it, the calm, deliberate look of someone who'd already made a decision. "I just wanted to show you something," he said. He stepped out of the car, walked around to my side, and opened the door. "Come on," he said softly. "I want you to see the water." I hesitated. "Max, it's the middle of the night, just come," he snapped, the softness vanishing like it had never been there. My breath caught. I stepped out slowly, my shoes sinking into the muddy ground. The air was thick and damp, carrying the smell of decay. Fireflies flickered weakly in the dark. He led me closer to the edge of the swamp, where the water was still and black, reflecting only a sliver of moon. Then, without turning to me, he said quietly, "You know, you really made things hard for me." "What are you talking about?" He laughed once, low and bitter. "You. The arguments. The money. The constant guilt. You just couldn't let things go, could you?" My pulse thundered. "Max, I don't understand." He turned to me then, eyes cold and gleaming. "I met someone, Luna. Someone who doesn't make me feel trapped." The words hit harder than any slap ever had. I stepped back, shaking my head. You're lying." "Oh, I wish I was," he said with a twisted smile. "But you? You'd never let me go without a fight. You'd take the house, the car, the money, everything." His voice dropped, quiet and final. "I can't let that happen." And then, before I could move, his hand was on my throat. The world spun. The sound of my gasp was swallowed by the night. He shoved me backward. My feet slipped on the wet ground, and suddenly I was falling, cold mud sucking me down. I screamed, but his voice drowned mine out. "You bitch." He hissed, his face contorted, his grip tightening as he forced me under the surface. "You think you can ruin me? This is exactly where you belong." The water rushed into my mouth, into my lungs, a burning, choking panic. I clawed at his arms, kicked, fought. The world turned into soundless black. My thoughts scattered, my mother's voice. The scent of jasmine from our wedding, the way sunlight used to feel safe then. Nothing. I don't know how long I was unconscious. But when I opened my eyes, everything was blurred, the stars above me, the weight of mud on my skin. The car was gone. The sound of its engine fading somewhere far away. He'd left me there, a body to rot in the swamp, but I wasn't dead. Not yet. I coughed, water spilling from my mouth, every breath a blade. My whole body trembled, raw and shaking. I tried to stand, but my leg gave out. Crawling was the only thing I could do. I dragged myself through the reeds, each inch a scream. The swamp stretched endlessly, dark, wet, suffocating. But then, far off, I saw a light. A faint, flickering glow moving across the water. A boat. Help. The word barely escaped my throat. Help. The light stopped, turned toward me. Then I heard a man's voice, deep, steady, and shocked. "Hey, ma'am. Hold on, I'm coming." The boat glided closer. I saw the outline of a man, broad shoulders, rough beard, maybe late 30s. He jumped into the shallows, wading toward me. "Jesus," he muttered, lifting me gently. "You're hurt bad." I tried to speak, but only managed a whisper. "Please, don't let him find me." "You're safe now, ma'am," he said, voice calm and kind. "You're safe." And as darkness pulled me under again, I clung to that voice, a stranger's promise in a world that had just tried to kill me. "If this is death," I thought weakly, "at least it's quiet." But it wasn't death. It was the beginning of something else, something the swamp couldn't bury. It was the night I stopped being a victim and started surviving. When I woke up, the first thing I felt was warmth. Not the suffocating heat of the Louisiana swamp, but the kind that came from a blanket, a crackling fire, and the faint smell of pine wood. The second thing I felt was pain. Every inch of my body throbbed, my ribs, my arms, my throat. But pain meant I was alive. When I tried to move, a voice stopped me. "Easy," it said. Deep, calm, with a rough edge like gravel softened by kindness. I turned my head slightly. A man sat near the window, fixing a fishing net. His beard was flecked with gray, his eyes steady but gentle. "You're safe," he said. "You're at my place. I found you near the bayou, half drowned." I tried to speak, but my voice cracked. "How long?" "2 days," he said, standing to pour water into a glass. "You had a fever. Thought I might lose you." He handed me the glass carefully, his hands surprisingly steady for someone who worked with nets all day. "Who are you?" I asked weakly. "Henry," he said simply. "Just Henry." The cabin was small, built from old cypress wood and patched with care. The walls smelled faintly of salt and tobacco. There were fishing rods leaning by the door, boots by the hearth, and a radio quietly playing some old country tune. Henry didn't ask questions. He didn't ask my name, or why I was covered in bruises. He just said, "You can stay here, till you figure things out." He lived alone. I noticed the wedding band still on his finger, dulled by time but never removed. "Your wife?" I asked once, softly. He nodded. "Cancer. 8 years ago." After that, we didn't talk much about pain. It was the one thing we both understood without needing words. Days turned into weeks. My body healed faster than my mind. At night, I still woke up gasping, the sound of Max's voice echoing in my dreams. "This is exactly where you belong." Sometimes I'd stumble outside just to breathe. Henry would be sitting on the porch, carving small wooden figures under the moonlight. He'd look up but never pry. "Bad dream?" I'd nod. "Coffee's still warm," he'd say. That was his way of saying I'm here. One morning, I walked to town for the first time. My face was hidden under a wide hat and sunglasses. I didn't want to be seen, not YET.AT. The small grocery store, an old newspaper sat near the counter. The headline stopped me cold. Local woman missing, husband devastated. Below it, Max's photo. His arm around me. My face blurred in the reprint, but I knew that smile, the one he made me wear for cameras. The article painted him as a grieving husband. It said I'd been unstable, prone to emotional episodes. Max told police he believed I'd run away. I felt something inside me snap, not with rage, but with clarity. He hadn't just tried to kill me. He'd killed my truth. When I got back to the cabin, Henry was cleaning fish on the porch. He looked up as I approached, holding the paper like a loaded gun. He said I ran away. I whispered. That I'm crazy. Henry wiped his hands on a rag and studied me for a long moment. Do you believe that? He asked. No, I said. But they will. He nodded slowly. Then don't run. Don't hide. Not from him, not from them. I stared at him, unsure if I'd heard right. What are you saying? He set the knife down, meeting my eyes. You don't have to be a ghost to be free. The words hung in the air like the first break of sunlight after a storm. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the small wooden desk Henry had given me and opened an old notebook. For the first time in months, I wrote everything. The first slap. The first time he locked me out in the rain. The first lie I told my mother about a kitchen accident. The way he said sorry with flowers that wilted before they bloomed. Every bruise. Every scream. Every night I pretended to love the man who was breaking me. I wrote it all down. My hand shook. But the words came anyway, spilling out like floodwater. I realized then that I wasn't writing for the police. I wasn't even writing for justice. I was writing for me, because if I stopped pretending, if I faced the truth on paper, maybe I could finally stop being afraid of it. Over the next few weeks, I became stronger. Henry helped me with chores, taught me how to fix nets, how to gut fish. The first time I tried, I nearly dropped the knife. He chuckled softly. You'll get it. It's all about balance. I realized he wasn't just talking about fishing. There were moments when I caught him watching me, not with desire, but with quiet respect. Like someone watching a storm survivor rebuild her house. One evening, we sat on the porch, the swamp glowing gold in the sunset. Do you ever think about leaving? I asked him. He smiled faintly. Every damn day. But this place? It's full of ghosts I'm not ready to let go of yet. I nodded. Me too. Then, after a long silence, I said the words I hadn't dared speak aloud since that night. I'm going back. Henry turned to me slowly. To him? No, I said. To me. He studied me for a moment, then nodded once, as if he'd been expecting it all along. Then I'll help you, he said. Whatever you need. For the first time in months, I smiled, a real smile, not the kind I used to wear for survival. That night, as I lay in bed, the wind whispered through the trees. Somewhere out there, the swamp still remembered what happened, the screams, the betrayal, the violence, but I wasn't that woman anymore. I wasn't drowning. I was breathing. I opened my notebook again and wrote a single line across the next page. He buried me in the dark. But he forgot. I'm made of light, and for the first time since that night, I slept without fear, because I knew exactly who I was. And soon? So would he. 6 months after the swamp, I stood in front of a mirror I barely recognized. The scars on my neck had faded into pale lines, and the bruises had long healed. But the woman staring back at me wasn't the same. She wasn't afraid anymore. Henry leaned against the doorframe, holding a small duffel bag. You sure about this? I nodded. I can't start over until I finish what he started. He didn't argue. He just handed me the bag. Inside were the things I'd written, my journals, photos of my injuries, copies of every hospital record he'd helped me collect. Evidence of pain. Proof of survival. The drive back to town felt surreal, like traveling through time and grief all at once. Every billboard, every tree looked familiar yet foreign. When we reached the police station, Henry squeezed my hand. I'll be right here when you're done, he said. Detective Maria Torres wasn't what I expected. She was in her early 40s, sharp-eyed, calm, the kind of woman who didn't waste time on pity. I remember your case, she said, flipping through an old file. Your husband claimed you vanished after an argument. She looked up. He didn't even look worried, you know. Just rehearsed. I swallowed hard. He tried to kill me. She nodded slowly, closing the folder. Then let's prove it. For weeks, Maria helped me rebuild the night piece by piece. We requested records, retraced his route, and checked nearby security footage. Most cameras in the area were broken or too far away, except one. A gas station, 5 miles from the swamp. The footage was grainy, black and white. But when the clerk played it back, my breath caught. There it was, Max's truck. License plate clear as day. He parked at 8:47 p.m., exactly the time he told police he was searching for me near the marsh. Only, he wasn't searching. He was dumping something into the back of his truck, my torn scarf. I pressed my hand to my mouth. That's it. That's the night. Maria's voice was calm, but I could see the steel in her eyes. We've got him. But she wasn't done. One afternoon, she stopped by the cabin, holding a small evidence bag. Inside was a cracked phone, mine. I asked the forensic team to extract what they could, she said. There's an audio file. Corrupted, but partially recoverable. When she pressed play, static filled the air. Then, faintly, his voice, low, cold, unmistakable, "You bitch. Get out of my life." A pause. Then that same phrase, clear and deliberate, "This is exactly where you belong." I froze. That was the last thing I'd heard before he pushed me into the swamp. Maria met my eyes. That's all we need. The trial began 2 months later. The courthouse smelled of old wood and nerves. I sat at the plaintiff's table, hands folded tightly, Henry sitting in the back row. Maria beside me, a quiet anchor. Max walked in wearing a dark suit, his expression perfectly composed, the mask I'd once loved. When he glanced at me, his smile was small and smug. It said, "You can't touch me." The defense started with their usual performance, painting me as unstable, resentful, possibly delusional. They used my hospital record to imply mental fragility. Max even shook his head dramatically when they mentioned false memory. But when it was my turn to speak, I stood. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't waver. I told them everything. The isolation. The bruises. The lies. How he'd controlled every dollar, every breath, every piece of who I was. How he drove me into the swamp that night and told me that I belonged in the mud. I could feel his eyes burning into me, but I didn't look away. When I finished, the courtroom was silent. Then Maria stood, pressing a button on the small recorder. "Your Honor," she said, "the prosecution would like to submit one final piece of evidence." The speakers crackled. At first, there was just static, like the whisper of rain. Then came his voice, "You bitch. Get out of my life." Pause. "This is exactly where you belong." The sound cut through the courtroom like a blade. No one moved. No one breathed. I watched Max's face crumble, the first crack in his mask. He looked at his lawyer, then at me. And for the first time, he didn't look angry. He looked terrified. When the verdict came, it was swift and unanimous. Guilty of attempted murder in the first degree. Sentence, life imprisonment without parole. As they led him away, he turned back to me, searching for something. Regret? Mercy? But I had none left to give. I whispered, just loud enough for him to hear, "This is exactly where you belong." When it was over, I walked outside. The sky was overcast, the same gray as the night I almost died. But this time, the air felt different, lighter. Henry was waiting by his old pickup truck. When he saw me, he didn't say anything. He just nodded, and for the first time since the swamp, I smiled. We drove away in silence, leaving the courthouse, and the ghost of the man who once owned my life, behind. The story made the front page of every newspaper in Louisiana. Wife survives murder attempt, husband sentenced to life in prison. They called me the woman who walked out of the swamp. For weeks, people treated me like some kind of ghost who'd found her way back to the living. But I wasn't a ghost. I was just a woman learning how to breathe again. The day after the verdict, I left the courthouse before sunrise. I didn't pack much, just a suitcase, a few photos, and a small wooden cross Henry carved for me while I was recovering. He'd said, "For protection, not religion." I understood. It was his way of saying, "You're safe now." We drove in silence for hours. The farther we got from the city, the lighter my chest felt. When the skyline disappeared behind the trees, I realized I wasn't just leaving a place. I was leaving a version of myself, the one who had lived in fear. Henry's cabin stood near the edge of the bayou, where the water met the tall grass. That first morning home, I watched him mend his nets, his sleeves rolled up, the sun touching the lines on his weathered face. He looked peaceful, content, a man who'd already made peace with loss. "You could stay here a while," he said, eyes still on his work. "I don't want to stay hidden forever," I replied. "But I don't want to go back there either." He nodded. "Then maybe it's time to plant something new." His words lingered long after he said them. A few weeks later, I found an old shack at the edge of town, once a feed store, now abandoned. The windows were broken, and the floor creaked with every step. But when I stood inside, surrounded by dust and light streaming through the cracks, I saw potential. I saw life. With Henry's help, I cleaned the place out. He fixed the door, patched the roof, and painted the old signboard. I spent my night sketching ideas, writing down names. Finally, I settled on one. Bayou bloomed. A flower that grows from mud, a reminder that beauty can rise from ruin. The grand opening wasn't grand at all. No ribbon, no crowd. Just me, a few vases of wildflowers, and Henry standing at the counter pretending to buy something he'd helped me plant. "You sure you want to charge me for this?" he teased, holding up a jar of water lilies. Business is business, I said, smiling for the first time in months. People started coming little by little. Old women buying flowers for church, young couples picking bouquets for dates, kids pointing at the hanging ferns. Every sale felt like a tiny victory, proof that I wasn't surviving anymore. I was living. Sometimes at dusk, Henry would stop by after fishing, carrying a basket of catfish and stories. We'd eat dinner on the porch, listening to the crickets and the soft hum of the bayou. He didn't talk much about his late wife, and I didn't ask. But once, as he cleaned his catch, he said quietly, she loved magnolias. Used to say they smelled like forgiveness. I looked at him, then at the row of magnolias I'd planted behind the shop. Maybe she'd like it here, I said. He smiled faintly. Maybe she would. We didn't need to say more. Some people healed through words. Others through silence. Months passed. My hands, once trembling from fear, now smelled of lilies and soil. I learned how to arrange flowers by feeling, to match their moods, their colors, their stories. Every bouquet I made carried a little piece of my heart. And every smile from a customer stitched me back together a little more. The nightmares still came sometimes, flashes of water, the sound of Max's voice in the dark. But when I woke, the first thing I saw was light streaming through the window and Henry's note on the counter, went fishing. Breakfasts on the stove. It was simple, ordinary, and that was everything I'd ever wanted. One rainy morning, a woman entered the shop, holding a newspaper under her arm. She looked familiar, cautious, kind eyes, like someone who'd seen too much and survived anyway. She pointed at a vase near the window. Those are beautiful. What do you call them? Bayou blooms, I said softly. They grow in mud but still find the light. She smiled. Like you. When she left, I stood there for a long while, staring at the flowers swaying gently by the glass. That evening, Henry came by as usual. The rain had stopped, and a faint mist floated over the marsh. He placed a small paper bag on the counter. Dinner. I peeked inside. Fried catfish again? Best in Louisiana, he said, grinning. We ate together, laughter blending with the rustle of rain outside. At one point, he looked at me, his voice low. You ever think about leaving this place? I shook my head. No. For the first time, I'm exactly where I want to be. He nodded, then leaned back, looking out into the night. Then you finally found it. Found what? I asked. He smiled softly. Where you belong. I didn't answer. I just looked out the window, watching fireflies drift over the bayou, tiny stars floating where once there had only been darkness. For the first time in years, I felt peace. Not because the pain was gone, but because I'd learned to live beside it. This was justice, not the kind handed down by a judge, but the quiet kind that comes when a survivor builds a life no one can take away again. The air smelled the same that morning, wet moss, river water, and something faintly sweet drifting from the wildflowers along the road. A full year had passed since the trial, yet every turn of the road still knew my name. I drove alone, windows down, letting the Louisiana wind tangle through my hair. The world outside had shifted, new roads, greener trees, but the swamp was eternal, untouched by time. That place had once been my grave. Now, it was only a place. The sun was lowering when I reached it, the narrow dirt path that wound into the marshland, where frogs sang their endless chorus. I parked by the edge, stepped out, and for a long time, just listened. The hum of cicadas. The ripple of muddy water. The whisper of wind through reeds. It was all the same, except for me. In my hands, I held a small bouquet wrapped in brown paper, magnolias, lilies, and bayou irises. Flowers that bloomed where others refused to grow. I had arranged them myself that morning, at the shop. My hands didn't shake anymore. When I reached the water's edge, I knelt down. The mud was soft under my knees, the same mud that had once pulled at my body, tried to drag me under. I ran my fingers through it, not in fear this time, but in acknowledgement. This is where it almost ended, I whispered. And where it began again. A dragonfly landed on the bouquet, its wings glimmering in the fading light. I smiled. You can rest here too, I told it softly. No one will hurt you. I closed my eyes and the memories came, not as nightmares, but as echoes. The headlights cutting through the fog. The sound of Max's voice, low and poisonous, you bitch. Get out of my life. The weight of his hands pushing me into the cold water. The silence after, but then came another sound, the splash of oars. The rough voice of a fisherman saying, hold on, ma'am. I got you. Henry. I would never forget the way his hands shook when he pulled me into the boat. Or the way he didn't ask a single question until I was ready to speak. He'd simply said, you're safe now. That moment was when my second life began. The sky turned golden, then pink. I stood, brushing dirt from my jeans, and held the flowers close to my chest. Max, I said aloud, my voice steady. It felt strange saying his name after so long, like calling out to a ghost. No, Max. This isn't where I belong. I paused, looking at the dark water that once tried to claim me. I survived. I opened my hands and let the bouquet fall. The flowers drifted on the surface, spinning slowly, carried by the current into the heart of the swamp. For a moment, they glowed, bright against the brown water, before fading into the distance. It didn't feel like goodbye to him. It felt like goodbye to her, the woman who once believed she couldn't escape. As I walked back toward the truck, the air grew softer, warmer. I thought about the shop, the laughter, the smell of lilies and coffee, Henry's quiet hum when he tuned his old radio. I thought about how I used to flinch at loud sounds, and how now, I danced to them. When I first met Henry, he told me he'd been alone for 8 years. He said grief was like water, it changes shape, but it never disappears. I didn't understand it then. Now, I do. Pain doesn't leave. It learns to flow differently. Before getting into the truck, I turned back one last time. The water shimmered under the fading sun. For the first time, it didn't look like a monster waiting to pull me down. It looked like a mirror, still, reflective, and full of light. On the drive home, the radio played an old blues song I hadn't heard in years. Something about second chances and slow healing. I laughed softly. The universe had a strange sense of humor. The highway stretched ahead, long, quiet, endless. Each mile took me further from the swamp, and closer to the life I'd chosen. When I reached town, the neon sign of Bayou Bloom was still glowing faintly. Through the shop window, I saw Henry sweeping the floor, his back slightly bent, a half-smile on his face when he noticed my car. He raised a hand. I waved back. And in that small gesture, I realized, peace doesn't arrive all at once. It grows, slowly, like a flower pushing through the mud, one petal at a time. That night, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea. The air smelled of wet earth and magnolias. Fireflies floated lazily around the porch light. And somewhere in the distance, a frog croaked, deep, content. Eternal. I thought about all the women who were still trapped in their own swamps, unseen, unheard, afraid to speak. If I could tell them one thing, it would be this: survival isn't about escaping death. It's about choosing life, again and again, until it finally feels like yours. I leaned back in my chair, the cup warm in my hands, and watched the horizon fade into stars. For the first time, I didn't feel like a survivor. I felt like someone living, truly, deeply living, and in that stillness, with the scent of flowers and the sound of the bayou breathing around me, I knew I had finally found where I truly belong.